So there's a group of 6 sphere spirits, 6 sphere spirits who would like to speak with you. They've been hanging around since a certain point in the second assistance group.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for your patience, guys.
No problem. So we are a group of men and women assembled here, and we'd like to ask you some questions about some of the matters you were discussing when you discussed principles in your last assistance group.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Nigel, and there are many men and women here gathered with me.
Yeah. And Nigel, just what's the time frame you've been in the 6th sphere?
Some hundreds of years, between 200 and 300 years.
Yeah.
For myself, since I've entered this state of being where I am.
And does that apply to most of the group as well?
It varies. Some have been here longer than me.
Mm-hmm.
I was French when I was on Earth.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I've always been interested in exploration of ideas and concepts and the love and code of morality that I believe must exist within humanity.
Mm-hmm. And does that apply to all of the group, or to varying degrees?
To varying degrees. We are most interested in some of the concepts you discussed about love and God's love in your presentations.
Sure.
One thing in particular, if we may start there, was about the nature of love. And you seemed to relate love to time, and that love may transcend time in some way, especially the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd like to understand what you mean by this.
Well, I think you've already probably had an experience of love transcending space to a degree, haven't you? In the sense that you know that you can love people on Earth even though they may be quite distant from you in terms of space, but they can feel that love as soon as you feel it for them. They feel it. You've had that experience?
No, we're not aware of this. We're not accustomed to discussing love in this way.
Right. How have you been discussing love?
Well,
do you feel it's an emotion or a thought, or how do you see love at this stage?
We feel, we know that these morals and principles and emotions have their origin in the mind, and it is really in the mind that we understand love to exist. And we don't commonly associate it with something that transcends barriers, more that it is something that dictates actions and conduct. And we feel that this regard that we have for love and humanity and an equal treatment of people, a good treatment, a moral treatment of people, this is something that guides us in the work that we do and in the way that we interact with others. And at times some of us have visited the Earth, most certainly, and interacted with people who are still in a physical form on Earth. But we do not understand this idea of emotion
versus a thought.
And emotion transcending space and time.
Whereas thoughts are much more restricted. Yep.
Well, no, thoughts can travel through space, not time.
Well, they also have other restrictions, thoughts. For example, a thought can't transcend the boundary between the, what I was describing as the 36th dimension, the dimension of soul union. A thought as you know it, that originates from the mind of the spirit body, can't transcend that boundary either. So thoughts have certain restrictions.
I see. But certainly we know that our thoughts here in the sixth sphere can be transmitted to a person on Earth over a large space.
And they can receive that thought and be influenced by that thought, certainly. Yes.
But this concept of emotion...
You've also had the experience, haven't you, though, that if thoughts are loving, they can transcend a further distance. You've also examined that?
Yes.
So you can see that if you have an unloving thought, it's very hard. So if you were in the first sphere and you had an unloving thought, it's very hard for that thought to arrive in the second sphere. In fact, almost impossible for that thought to arrive in the second sphere.
Yes, there's a limitation of influence of the thoughts.
If they are unloving.
Yes.
Yes.
Or in a lesser moral condition, we would call it.
Correct, yes. So the way you see love currently is like an ethical or moral... I would separate ethics from morals, to be honest, and we can talk about the separation of what that means. But if we examine it from an ethical perspective, the way you see love is a sort of the application of ethics. In other words, that you should not demand from another what you would not give them, and you should also give to another what you would like to have for yourself. And you can see that these are basic sort of ethical principles.
And we can see that to be a good person, one must be guided by principles and not by selfish endeavour.
Yes. So
if a society works cohesively, if each of its members are guided by principles and are not involved in simply pleasing themselves.
Sure. So we need to be quite specific. When we say guided by principles, we're not suggesting here that everyone has different principles, but rather that everyone is guided by similar principles, even though they may have different desires and different areas of expertise and different joys and so forth.
Yes.
That they all be guided by the same kind of ethical principles is what you're suggesting.
If they should, what we do here is to consider what is of good for everyone involved in terms of their welfare emotionally and physically.
So it's not a selfish desire, but rather a desire for everyone.
Yes.
Yes. And you've learnt to, if you like, control your desires so that your desires are in harmony with what everyone would wish. And that's how you've actually arrived at the sixth sphere, in fact.
I wouldn't call it control our desires. We've seen that it is important to overcome certain desires and the logic of working towards a common good or to the good of everyone, not...
Certainly, I might probably stated it incorrectly there when I said control. It's more a desire to bring your desires into harmony with what seems to be the law-based principle that you've now learnt as a process of progress to the sixth dimension.
Yes, and this is why we were quite interested in the material which you began to present, because it focused very much on laws and principles, and we feel quite open or in tune with these kinds of ideas. But then within that you began to present things in a way that we were not familiar with, and you seem to present concepts that suggested that we could transcend things, certain aspects of what we have believed are law-based restrictions upon the way that we live. Such as this idea of a love from God which can transcend space and time, and this seemed to almost suggest that time travel would be possible if something can transcend time. There were very many questions that we had based on some of these principles, which seem to expand beyond what we thought was possible.
Yes, I get it. All right, so perhaps what we need to do first is talk about some fundamental things that I feel perhaps you haven't considered. The first fundamental thing is the makeup of the human. You saw when you're on Earth, you probably felt that the body, even though you may have considered there might have been an afterlife, you probably felt that the body was a physical body I'm talking about now. For many of you, you would have felt that that was probably your total existence. Or you would have felt that if it's not your total existence, it was very undefined what the next level of existence would be.
Yes.
But as you've seen in passing and progressing as you have done, you've seen now that you have a spirit body, which obviously was there already.
Yes.
Before you passed, and by now you would see that these spirit bodies exist at the time of conception, so you probably would have seen that in your own investigation.
Yes.
That the spirit body and the physical body are created together at the time of conception, and that these two bodies obviously are connected to each other, which you've probably seen. Is that correct?
Yes.
The connection?
Yes.
So I suppose what I'm suggesting there is that on Earth the concept was that you had just a physical form, or that's all you knew. But after you passed or changed your condition, let's call it, in terms of, the physical body died and now your spirit body was a primary source of information for you, now you could see you had a spirit body. And since then you've been developing your spirit body and your spirit mind just in the same way as many humans on Earth develop their physical body and physical mind.
Mm-hmm.
But as yet you've not seen the soul.
No.
So to you at this stage, the soul is almost like, again, maybe it's there and maybe it's not type of thing. Would that be true? Was that the way you sort of see it? You hear about the soul and
Yes, we have no firm belief in the soul as something that exists, but we are
separate to the spirit body.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
we're open to sort of
the concept.
Yes,
yeah.
And hearing about it. But
of course. But what I'm suggesting in that process is that obviously you can see that a lot of our assimilation of ideas and concepts comes from the fact that we're going through an experience, and that experience we're going through is often defined by what we allow ourselves to consider or imagine might be possible. And you've probably seen that, particularly when you first passed. You would have, if you can remember back to that time, you probably would remember the time when you didn't really think much was possible, and you didn't even know if sometimes if you had died, and then when you realise you died, then you go, oh, then this spirit body thing must be, I'm in it, so it must be possible, right?
Yes.
And that then opened your mind to some other potential possibilities, although they came to you probably now what you would see as quite a slow rate based on different emotions or belief systems that you had to give up before you could assimilate new information. That'd be true, wouldn't it?
Yes. Yes, I think so.
For the majority of you. So what I'm suggesting is the concept of the soul, which is, most six-sphere spirits believe the soul is the spirit body, and so therefore do not believe that the soul is sort of another part of oneself that one can develop. And so they start considering the development based on the limited thought. They consider that the only way really that can be developed is through the spirit body, just like on Earth we develop through the physical body. And what I'm suggesting is that then places limitations upon the development of the soul.
Yes, we feel that this is why we've opened up to the idea that the soul is something beyond what we understand now from listening to this. So everything you've said, yes,
so
we know you say that.
Yep, so we're right up to that point. Like, this is what I'm checking on, just to make sure that you're following me to that point. So let's assume for a moment that the soul is not the same as the spirit body, which would make sense. It's obviously something the spirit body cannot see, and so therefore must be made of a different kind of substance, if you like. If we look at it from a technical perspective, must be made from a different kind. If it exists, it must be made from a different kind of substance. And it potentially could have different kinds of interactions that the spirit body is not capable of understanding, just like the spirit body is capable of different types of interactions that the physical body is not capable of. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
So in other words, what I'm suggesting is that if the soul does exist, it has a superset, if you like, of capabilities that do not exist in the spirit form. And the spirit form, just like the spirit form, has a superset of capabilities that don't seem to exist in the physical form for most people. So what that means then is there must be some way of working out whether this soul actually exists while you're in the spirit form, just like there is some ways, as you now know, that you could have examined the spirit form while you're in the physical form.
Yes.
You just weren't open to the concept of doing that when you were in the physical form, and so that prevented you from engaging that examination. Does that make sense? And what I'm suggesting is not being open to the soul means that you're now limiting your ability to determine whether the soul exists while you're in the spirit form. Now that you're gathering some information about it, now there's this potential that's now developed inside of you saying, maybe we need to examine what is this soul thing and what does it do? How does it move? What is its being? How does it influence our lives right now even? Right? And what part of me right now is this soul? Right? Now, what I'm suggesting is you have considered also that you've had to bring yourself into harmony with ethics and morality. And you can see already the ethics and morality you had to bring yourself in harmony with to get to the sixth sphere is quite structured, isn't it? It's like it is definitely law-based, as you can see. It's just like it's as predictable as the law on Earth of gravity, for example.
So, yes, it's very predictable, and when you act more in harmony with these things that we've established, you can measure the results.
Yes.
There is sort of progression.
Yes, and so that means that laws must exist. Now at this stage, it's sort of the way you consider it, as I understand, is that it's more like a universal law thing than that something or someone might have created these laws. So I understand that you sort of see it more like it's just a part of the nature of things. But we have established, obviously, or you have established through your progress, that there are physical laws that govern the physical life. There are spirit-based laws that are still physical in nature that govern the physical life of the spirit form, in the spirit form. And then there seems to be also laws, as you've now learned, that govern morality and ethics, which are not physical or metaphysical things, but rather are what you consider to be at this stage part of your thinking system, part of your belief system.
But these principles of personal conduct and regard for others and these things, while they are thought-based or internally based to the individual, it affects the physicality of what that person can achieve and experience their freedom within this physical, which is spiritual, existence that we have.
So let's call it metaphysical for the sake of a word. But
okay, in our metaphysical existence.
Yes.
What has prompted our sort of discussion with you today is that we feel very happy and content. And until you spoke of this issue of love transcending time
and space,
particularly this love from God as a sort of a substance.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
Yes. No, I'm not asking about that. Yeah. I'm saying that until we heard you speak of that,
yeah,
we felt zero incentive to change anything because we don't feel limited in our life. We feel a lot of freedom and satisfaction in our life as we are now. And when you spoke of this other thing, it made us consider that perhaps what we feel is quite a free life and existence that we have now. Perhaps there are limitations that we haven't been sensitive to, and perhaps there is the possibility of an experience beyond what we have that we are limited from by not understanding some other things.
Yes, and you know that what I'm teaching suggests that, obviously.
You suggested that, and this made us consider a lot of things differently. But I suppose, to be plain with you, the reason we're speaking with you is that we're still not convinced that there is a benefit, really, to what you're considering. And what you've been presenting, you're teaching, some of us have viewed you over a number of years on Earth presenting and teaching these things. And we haven't been convinced that there is really any benefit to engaging with what you call the soul and this emotional experience until we heard you speak about this substance which transcends space and time. And it made us wonder if by receiving that substance we could somehow transcend space and time. And so I understand that. Forgive my interruption. I understand that you are going to tell us more about that, but I realised that I hadn't given much context as to what it was we were actually interested in and why.
I do understand what you're interested in. Yep. So there's what I'm trying to do is sort of lead you to a place here based on what you've already understand into a place of new things that you may not have considered. That's what I'm attempting to do. And so what I'd like to do is say, okay, so you've established at this stage that there is the potential that a soul exists, perhaps. But at this stage you haven't examined whether it does or whether it's that important.
Well, to be honest, we're not adverse to it as a concept, but until now we haven't thought that it's important to establish whether or not it is, because many of us were on Earth in our physical form, as you referenced. We were engaged in the pursuit of understanding a moral and ethical life and the broader concepts. We were scholarly, if you like, in thinking about these principles and concepts that should guide the life of a good and moral person. And then when we passed, we realised that there was more, and I personally was not adverse to that idea, just as now I'm not adverse to the idea of there being a soul. But I could see that really, once I left the physical form and understood I had a spirit body, I merely continued in the same kind of pursuits as I had on Earth. And there was some more flexibility in the way that I did it. I knew more suddenly.
With the exception, though, that you purified your moral and ethical state, obviously.
But I felt that I was in this process while on Earth, and then when I passed, I continued in that process until we've reached this place where we feel very free and very happy.
Yeah.
But I don't see yet the benefit of really establishing whether or not there is a soul, because I feel that if we continue in the way that we have, then eventually we will know. And
there's a presumption there, though, isn't there? And the presumption is that if you continue in the same way that you've learnt up to this point, that eventually you'll understand the soul. Yes. If the soul exists.
If it exists.
And that presumption is just a presumption. It's not necessarily reality.
It's based on the idea that logically, whatever laws govern existence, they helped us to establish, once we left the physical form, that the spirit form existed. And
but I feel you're not being very logical, actually, though, Because if you're truly logical, you would see that perhaps the method of learning that you've been taking from the time of life on earth right the way through to where you are now might not be the only method of learning. And if you continue to apply the same method of learning to a different thing, then perhaps there may be some flaws there in your logic.
So why has it worked until now, if it is not a sort of a foolproof way of existing with the interacting with the universe and understanding laws?
Well, I suggest that what's happened here is that you've done what many people have done with their logic, and that is that you've limited your logic in its application. And what I mean by that is that if a soul does exist, then perhaps the soul, just like the spirit body, has different components to it, just like the spirit body has different components than the physical one. And perhaps some of those components, which you are assuming are engaged by the same method of learning, have to be engaged with different methods of learning that you have yet to learn. And if that is the case, then you are severely limiting yourself. In addition to that, if you were really logical, you would see that if the spirit body has a superset of abilities to the physical form, and by engaging this superset of abilities, by understanding them firstly, and then engaging them, and then understanding the laws that allow for their development, as you have done, you have now come to the limitation, if you like, where you are now, of feeling like you have far less limits than you had when you were on Earth, which is very true, you do, as a result of this development. But if you were completely logical, you would say, well, if there is this soul, then this soul would have even a superset of abilities that the spirit body does not have, and therefore must have a very large impact on my future rather than a minor one. Do you see where I'm headed with that?
Yes, but why is it that the laws are not just like the laws and the laws that govern the operation of existence?
That's what I'm getting to in my reasoning with you.
Enabled me to establish that I had a spirit body. Mm-hmm. Why are they not acting now to expose the fact that I have a soul?
They are, but you're ignoring them, is what I'm suggesting.
You're saying that through having this conversation itself, this is part of the operation of the law.
Correct.
Yes, I see that.
Right. And the whole reason why you've come to me for the discussion, if you think about it, was that a certain, if we can call it a worry, it's not really a worry, is it? But there is a certain thing that's come up now in listening to the conversations in the assistance group and so forth. There's certain things that have come out now going, maybe we are limiting ourselves, whereas before you were not thinking you were limiting yourselves.
Yes, no, I understand now.
But logically,
you're saying that this could be the operation of the law, that curiosity that now exists within us.
I'm saying it is. You remember in the assistance group I talked about the importance of desire. Up until now you've not had a desire to discover the soul because you've not logically thought about the fact that it would have far superior capacities than the spirit body does.
That's true. That's what sparked our interest.
Now, I'm suggesting to you that if the soul does exist, obviously it must have far superior capacities to what the spirit body does. And then I'm also suggesting that if you limit your examination of that in that particular direction, then you must be placing quite severe limitations on your development, just like a person on Earth who refuses to examine his development in ethics, for example, places severe limitations on his life in the spirit world. And what I'm suggesting is that if you continue to think that it's not that important, then maybe it's like a person on Earth continuing to think that him worrying about ethics and morality while he's on Earth isn't that important.
Yes, I see that.
And you now know that is not true, right? So what I'm suggesting also in the discussion is that the things that you've learnt, or the method via which you've learned up to this point, may have, right from the beginning, have had severe limitations placed on it based on your particular feelings and thoughts while you're on Earth, and the feelings and thoughts that you have imbibed as you're developed in the spirit world. In other words, it may have taken you down a road that, while it has been a progressive road, may not have been the progression that you could have obtained.
Yes, this has been a point of discussion amongst us, because clearly we've observed you discuss these two routes of progression and, various things we've heard you speak about. But really, until now, there has been nothing to convince us that this emotional route that you've discussed many times has any benefit, because we know certain operations of the law and the universe, and we do experience greater and greater happiness and freedom by observing them and not examining this emotional route. And to be very honest, we see people on earth not being slaves to their emotion or being highly involved in emotion.
You know that that's not what I'm talking about.
No, but we don't see how to make a transition from the way that we are used to learning and understanding things to a different way. And as I said, we haven't seen any potential benefit anyway until now.
Well, I feel it wouldn't be right to say you haven't seen any potential benefit. Perhaps we haven't seen the benefit of change because we've felt so content as we are. Yeah, but you've never examined a person who has changed to know what the change would be. So you haven't scientifically really engaged this process. It's more been a feeling of there's no need for us to examine than there has been to examine in order to measure.
No, we've felt no need to measure because we feel so content.
Well, partly it's also because you feel you already know the answer.
Yes, true.
And a person who believes they already know the answer, as you know,
doesn't ask a question.
Doesn't ask the questions that they need to ask in order to learn new things.
Yes.
And this has been a part of the issue for yourselves. As you know, one of the laws in the spirit world is that you must ask questions in order to learn. You've got to want to know something that's new before you'll probably be shown something that's new. And even though the universe around you is already trying to guide you into knowing those things. So the real question then becomes, well, why did you, even though you have these particular feelings, why have you been attracted to coming to the seminars or the teachings that I've been teaching for quite a number of years now, if there was not some kind of inquisitive feeling or some kind of feeling that maybe you don't know everything that has driven the desire? Can you see there has to have been?
Yes.
Otherwise you would not have attended. Is that not true?
Well, we're always interested in things. That's a part of how we are.
But what's drawn you to this thing? As you know, in the past, you, through desire, have drawn things into your life.
Yes.
That then you've learned from.
Yes. No, we recognise now through the course of this discussion that it is likely the operation of the law that is now exposing these new possibilities to us.
Correct. So what I'd like to do is fast track a bit, if we can. So we've established that the possibility of the soul existing that's possible.
Yes.
We've established that if the soul does exist, it is far higher in its capabilities than the spirit body must be, or the spirit body's mind must be.
Logical, yes.
Seems logical. Given the fact that there's physical to spirit body relationship, it seems highly likely. You've not examined that potential up until this point, and so you've thought it's not very important to examine the capabilities of the soul or to engage whatever learning you need to engage in order to learn about it. And that's what's driven your resistance to learning about it. But you've also been drawn through your curiosity to my teachings on earth, obviously, which has then drawn you to think, oh, maybe there is this possibility.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd like to do now is just invite a few spirits to you who know me, but also who have had a similar experience to you where they developed until the sixth sphere of the spirit world. And some of them, I'm going to ask some of them who have sort of are well known historically to come to you, who have used that same method of progress, if you like, that you've had for the time you've been past. Now,
so these, yes, so we're conversing with them now.
yes.
So these are people you are saying who have really connected with this other state of...
Well, the real self is what I call the soul. The spirit body and the spirit body's mind that you've been using to develop is only a part of yourself. You've also developed your soul to a degree without really knowing it at this stage, and we'll talk a bit maybe about that, or they can talk to you about that. But what I would like them to do, do you mind telling me some of their names who have come to you? And how long they were in the sixth sphere state is what we'd like to discuss.
I think the one here who is most probably well known on Earth today is called Aristotle.
Mm-hmm.
And he spent 600 years in the... No.
Well, if you consider the time he spent from Earth to the sixth sphere state, that's quite a significant time, isn't it?
Yes.
Much longer than 600 years.
Yes.
Yep. So what was that period of time? So he spent 600 years in the sixth sphere state.
Yes. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
But if you talk about the time since you lived on Earth to that state, it was quite a significant
That's right.
period of time, wasn't it?
That's right.
1,000 years.
Yes.
Mm.
But he spent 600 years here in this state that we are in.
Yes, yes. So he can assure you, obviously, from his own learning now, that there are other states that exist. But that's not the point that I would like to make. To fast track this, what I'm going to ask them to do is to take you to a gate, which is the gateway between the sixth sphere and the seventh sphere.
Yes, we've never been here before.
No. Right. Now what I would like you to attempt to do is to pass the gate without their assistance.
No, we cannot.
Yes.
We cannot.
Now what I would like them to do is to pass the gate for you, just to demonstrate to you that it's possible.
Yes, they can.
Okay. So we've established immediately that this is a place you've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And if you examine it, it's probably because, again, you have had no interest in developing further.
That's right.
Yes. Can you see the limitation that this particular sort of presumption that everything how you've learnt in the past is going to be the same as what you learn in the future has prevented you from even getting or arriving to this point?
Yes, and it's quite attractive to us, this gate.
Yes.
It feels as if what is on the other side is better.
Well, just as your transitions from the fourth sphere to the fifth and the fifth sphere to the sixth were better every time, it naturally would follow, would it not, that this transition is going to result in some pretty amazing changes and experiences that you've not considered possible before. So, it makes sense, again, logically, that would be the case. Now, it's very unusual for a person, a group of people such as yourselves, to even be brought to this location, I must point out. And there's a real good reason for that, and that is anybody who doesn't have a desire to arrive at this point usually does not. And so, therefore, never tests the reality as to what's ahead. Do you see?
Never experiences the limitation, do you mean?
Yes. They never experience the limitation of the current condition, but they also never imagine that there must be something beyond their current condition. And that's partly because you've been very happy, and much happier than you've ever been on Earth or any other location in the spirit world. But also it's partly been because I suppose you could call it a level of, I don't know, I don't want to offend you, but it's sort of like almost a level of arrogance in some way that has developed in terms of saying, well, how we've progressed up to now must be the same way we progress from now on. And therefore it's easy to dismiss other potentials because of that preconditioning, if you like. Does that make sense?
Yes, we can see that. We can see the logic in that.
Yeah.
We've felt that what we're doing is working, so why
change it?
And if it works and it clearly leads to happiness and progression, and we know we're far more developed than any other spirits that we encounter, then why would we question our method?
And when you say, though, that you're far more developed than any other spirits you encounter, obviously that doesn't include the other spirits in the sixth dimension, does it?
No. I mean in other realms.
Yeah. But if you examine Aristotle is able to pass this gate. All of the other spirits, men and women, both sexes, both genders, are able to pass this state. One thing you haven't examined at this point is that they have had to detune their condition to even speak with you, in fact.
Yes, but we can tell there is a different quality to them that
is
not within us.
But what I'm going to ask them to do now is to demonstrate some of the power of the love that they have, and you may find yourself having to shield even your eyes from it, and just tell them when to stop. They'll increase the feelings they have for you until such a time as you find it uncomfortable, and then they'll stop.
It's quite powerful.
And you notice that it's not an intellectual thing. It actually affects you emotionally. Do you notice that?
Yes, and
that's what makes you a bit sort of...
Yes. We feel
almost
very...
fearful of it.
Yes. Yes. It's unusual to experience this sensation now, but we feel uncomfortable with this.
Yes, there's a level of discomfort and a level of fear almost, similar to some of the fears you've had in the past when you made different transitions or just before you made a transition.
Yes.
Which is in itself an indication that perhaps what's beyond is still much better, right?
Yes.
Given the fact that historically you've had similar experiences. So now there's two ways you could approach what you do from here on. I'll just have a cough. Excuse me. One way is that you could attempt using the same techniques that you've always used to progress at this point. You could attempt to use the same techniques that you've learned up to this point to pass the gate.
Yes.
That's one option.
But it's not logical that will work, because
of course.
Clearly they have a different quality about them.
Yes, I'm just saying these are the possibilities. You could attempt to do the same if you wanted to, if you're uncertain or whatever. But it would be better, wouldn't it, to ask them how they pass the gate?
Yes.
Would make much sense, and I know you've already engaged in that conversation.
Yes.
But you can see that it would be much better to ask these people who have passed the gate and who clearly can how they do it, and therefore what they needed to do. Now, Aristotle, being sort of in the sixth sphere for a long period of time, much longer than many of you have even been in the spirit world, you can see he must have investigated many things, but still couldn't pass this gate until he had to develop some other parts of himself, obviously. And so then the question becomes, well, how did he do that? What needed to be developed, and how do you do it? Isn't it?
Yes, and so from our interactions with these very generous ones here with us now, and through our observation of your teachings, we can see that this soul, emotional path is clearly the way that this has happened for these people. And so we are beginning to see that there is some benefit to investigate that now. But it is true that
and when you
all
say
of
some
us,
benefit, it must be a lot of benefit if you think about it logically. There must be a lot of benefit. Similar to the benefits that you had investigating the paths you followed after you passed, that you maybe weren't investigating so much before, you know. There's obviously a lot of benefit, not just some. So don't confine yourself by thinking that maybe the benefit's only minor. Because obviously it's probably major. Wouldn't that be right? The other thing is that up until this point in time, you've not examined, because of your philosophical way of thinking, you've not examined the truth of God's existence. You've examined law, and you could see that law is well established by, you know, the facts that you've established in your progression up till this point. But you've not examined where or who that law came from either.
no, we haven't had a concept of a personal God.
No.
And
in fact, if you think about it, you've been quite resistive to that concept, based again on experiences you had on Earth in particular.
Yes.
That caused you to feel like, you know, these ways of thinking are very limited, and that's caused you to be quite resistive to the potential that a God even exists. And the problem with that too is that it's also stopped your development of the area of your soul that is able to connect to that God. So therefore transform from being a human creature to more a divine sort of creature.
And I feel very, very uncomfortable with this idea of a personal God.
Yes.
I feel similarly to emotion,
yes,
as I do to God.
Yes, I agree. That's why you've not opened your mind or your heart up to this kind of concept or this kind of area of investigation up until now. And it's only by looking at the potential personal benefit to yourselves that you've even examined this at this point even. So, you know...
It feels like limitation because I feel and many of us are now feeling this discomfort and fear. This is so uncommon. We're not used to this anymore, and it feels restrictive to have these feelings again. It feels like a loss of condition.
But as in the past, it is these feelings that prevent the next condition.
Yes,
you
I can
see
that.
And up until this point, the way you've progressed from old condition to new condition is by using your intellect to a great degree to eventually get rid of, if you like, emotional belief systems that have driven your intellect in the past, and then you've released them and you've come to a new belief system which has then enabled you to get to the new location. Does that make sense? But what I'm suggesting is that to get from this location where you are now into the new location where obviously these spirits can come and go, you know, these spirits we've talked about and who've come to you can come and go between these places. So that indicates then that there must be some other thing that needs to be developed that at this stage you have not developed.
Yes.
Yes, so that's quite clear, isn't it, really, from the little experiment we've engaged. So obviously it makes sense now to have a great discussions, doesn't it, with these men and women that have come to you and start following some of their advice. But I would like to probably say a few things about their advice.
Okay.
Some of their advice is going to feel very unusual because what I'm going to suggest to you is that in your own current progression or the path that you've taken up to this point, you've neglected the development of soul-based pathways that need to be developed as well as this intellectual pathway that you developed, right? Or you could say you have developed a pathway into morals and ethics up until this stage. Okay. And what I'm suggesting is that there is another thing that needs to happen internally inside the soul now, not just your spirit mind or your spirit body, but there's something that has to happen inside of your soul where you learn a whole heap of new ways of interacting that these people who have these abilities obviously can and have developed.
Mm.
And they may suggest to you to go back to the beginning of developing these ways. And some of those paths of development began in the third dimension of the spirit world, the third sphere.
So what kinds of things will we need to develop?
Well, at this stage you could say that your mind is dominant without a doubt. You know, even in this conversation with me, you've not expressed a large amount of emotion, even though there have been times when you've been frustrated with me, you haven't even expressed that frustration. Does that make sense? Even though I can feel it from you, is not something that you've acknowledged or allowed yourselves really to feel very much of.
No.
And right now, in the presence of the gate, you've acknowledged there's this other feeling that you also have, which feels very uncomfortable. But at this stage, all of you are not really certain of what that feeling is, even.
No.
And then when I discuss things like perhaps there is a personal God, a God that you can have an interaction with, there's a whole lot of other feelings that start percolating up there that obviously have been within you this whole time since you've passed, but that you've not really been very aware of or concerned about.
Mm.
Now, obviously, there has to be ways to deal with these things, is what I'm suggesting. And many of these ways of dealing with these particular emotions begin in the third sphere, and you skipped over them in those dimensions, the third and the fifth in particular. You skipped over them because they didn't interest you at the time.
I see.
And so you're going to have to, if you like, get some schooling.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds a bit, that's not to put you down or anything. There's just some education that obviously must have occurred for some people. And if you ask Aristotle and some of the others, you'll see that some of them had to go back to those schools of education to start to understand how this soul thing worked.
Right.
And how they could engage it and how those methods of engagement could cause their progress.
Mm.
But I'm going to leave that discussion for them to have with you. Obviously, they can have it much faster than I can have with you. And so, you know, you'll be able to assimilate information much faster. But you're going to have to be aware that some of the feelings you're going to have now are going to be very different to what you've experienced up to this point. Because there's areas of yourself that you've not yet opened, and those areas have to be opened in order to make this transition.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we have thought that we know ourselves well.
Yes.
And that we are free of fear and uncertainty and discomfort. But now from this discussion,
you can see that's not true.
We're seeing that we've really avoided certain things.
You've denied them, if you like. And you've managed to progress by denying them to a degree. But obviously the limitation of this progress now is that you can't enter this next dimension or this next sphere. So there's the limitation. You've hit the limitation of this kind of progress.
We feel thankful, very thankful to you and these people who have come to assist us.
But you first came to ask the question about love transcending time and space.
Yes.
And I'd probably like to give you the answer to that question.
That would be great.
Now, logically, if a God does exist, where does he exist? It becomes a question.
Mm-hmm. Well, we heard you teach outside of the universe.
Yes, that would make sense logically.
Mm-hmm.
So if he exists outside of the universe and he's giving love to you and you are in the universe, and if he is without time, not constrained by time or space, and the universe itself is constrained by time and space, then obviously the love that God has that he can transmit to you as an emotion must be unbound by time and space.
Yes, we understood that point of logic, but then we had many subsequent questions such as, well, if one was to receive this substance, which transcends time and space, does that then give the individual the potential to transcend time and space if they have a part of that within them?
Well, let's look at the concept of time travel, if you like. There's this concept of time travel, which is basically that it means that you could go back in time, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that.
Okay.
But I'm suggesting instead that once we receive God's love and and substances from God, that we can actually have everything that we desire that's in harmony with His laws happen instantaneously, rather than needing time to happen. Now, up until now, you've had everything needed time. Even when you come to Earth to speak to me, you've been conscious of a passing of time.
Yes.
Have you not? So whenever you go from here back to the sixth dimension or down to a third dimension, there's always a passing of time that occurs that you're aware of. Right? And what I'm suggesting is that these limitations, and if you think about the potential of this statement, these limitations will no longer exist for you if this transition is made. Not the transition from the sixth to the seventh, but the seventh to the eighth, will cause maybe these limitations no longer exist for you.
So that would mean that, okay, we can't travel back or forward in a time line, in a time continuum, but the time we could instantaneously transcend spaces that it would usually take us time to cover, or
Correct.
We would...
I'm saying that's a guarantee.
Right.
But I'm also saying your first statement is interesting because there is the potential, if we receive more and more substances from God, there is the potential, is there not, that maybe at some time in the future you may be able to go back and forth in time.
Well, this was what sparked our interest. This is what caused our whole reconsideration of whether or not it was valuable to receive God's love.
So there is firstly the transition that these other spirits who would talk to you, like Aristotle, would know that he can have a feeling to go somewhere and he's instantly there. Right? And you can confirm that with him.
Yes. We experience it very quickly. As it is.
Yeah, but ourselves. He is actually instantly there.
Yes. And the transmission of...
his spirit body is instantly in the new place without there needing to be any time passing for him to arrive in this new space. So that is in itself a huge advantage.
Yes.
Over your current condition, isn't it?
Yes.
And then it's also possible, and I'm not saying it is true at this stage, because I don't, in your current state, and while you have a spirit body, it certainly isn't going to be true. But what I'm suggesting is there might be even future progress that could be made that results in you being able to go back and forward in time.
Yes, this interests us greatly. Yes. So you're saying it's a potential, but not certain.
No, I'm saying it's certainly not going to be a potential while you stay in your spirit.
Yes, no, we understand.
Certainly not a potential there. But it is a potential
in a soul-based
in a different form
existence.
If we understand the different form. It is a potential, isn't it?
Well, we don't know. That's what we were asking, yes.
Well, I'm saying it's a certain potential, not an actual fact. I'm saying that obviously, if God's love, if we think about it again logically, if God's love, God is a being that transcends time. I'm suggesting. And I'm saying that God's love can enter a universe that is governed by time.
Yes.
And yet he is ungoverned by time.
Yes.
So that would suggest that the love itself doesn't need to be governed by time. Being a substance that is received from someone who's not governed by time,
Yes.
then the love itself mustn't be governed by time, is what I'm suggesting.
Yes, that's what we understood.
And that then opens up a whole lot of potential concepts, doesn't it?
Yes,
Scientifically.
That's exactly our question. So are you saying that you do not know yet it still remains a potential, you have not yet experienced this movement through time in a soul-based experience, having received this substance, this love?
Well, I haven't remembered everything yet from my personal experience.
I see.
So, I can't say for certain what I will remember based on my current limitations that are imposed upon me here and, my own lack of development here. So I can't say at this stage whether I have. The feeling I have is that we have experienced it, but I can't say how that has occurred. But my feelings are, even if we have not experienced it, it is a potential.
It seems very logical that it would be, if
Correct.
the love itself can transcend the time.
But there must be written laws that govern whether you can change time, as you know. That would be that would have to be involved in this process, would it not? Mm-hmm. Yes. So there has to be
law. There's always law.
There has to be law governing it, obviously.
Yes.
Just like there has to be law with every single thing we do. Mm. The reason why I state these things to you is because I feel that obviously you're interested in that kind of concepts and so forth.
Yes.
And this is probably an area of interest that you probably will retain after you've made these transitions. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you're not going to probably give away everything like some of you. I feel some of you have this almost fear that if you enter this new state, what about the old state? What are you going to lose?
And the old way of doing things, which we've felt to be so effective, we've found to be so effective. Mm-hmm. Do we have to throw everything out, the baby with the bathwater, as the saying is?
On Earth, yeah.
On Earth, and there's some uncertainty about that.
But these are all questions that you can ask people who've already made the transition, aren't they?
We'll ask these good fellows.
And I can answer them, of course, yes. but I think you'll be have a really good conversations in this process. Mm-hmm. And the key part is that these conversations are going to bring up emotions. And the key part for you there is the difficulty you're going to experience is that you've tried to detune from emotion in order to progress. And so this is going to feel like a very uncertain period for a while you make this transition. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I'm saying not to get disappointed by the fact that you might struggle to do the transition. It might take some years of Earth time even for this transition to occur, based on the fact that you've had a lot of learned behaviours and thoughts that you may have to start confronting in an emotional way, which you're not used to doing. You're used to confronting things from a logical perspective, but not really confronting them, fully confronting them emotionally. And so, what I'm saying to you is that, you need to allow yourself to go through this transition and to not resist it, to trust that any further progression is going to be to your benefit. As well as to the benefit of obviously others, just like your past progression has been.
We are very grateful. Thank you for this time and for this opportunity to finally speak with you on these matters.
Can I ask you a few questions before you go? I know you're so keen to go now and chat with these people. I was just wondering, what originally brought you to the groups?
Was you yourself. We could see that you understood law. We couldn't, in the beginning, we couldn't really understand what you were talking about because it was so alien to the way that we understand law. And so we've come and gone at different times, observing you and observing what you teach. And it wasn't really until this last group meetings that you had together that we felt we could connect more with why it was many of the things you discussed we had established, although those things pertaining to the soul, again, we haven't established those, but many things that you said we knew, and then we began to understand why we could tell that you knew something about law even though you hadn't really, you'd been speaking about the soul so much, we couldn't understand that part of it.
Did you ever ask yourself why it was that somebody on earth, because you've not even met somebody in the sixth sphere at this stage, have you, who's prompted this kind of thought?
About soul.
Or about law governing soul?
No, but we all commonly discuss law. We know law exists.
Of course. But you've not met someone on earth who's ever discussed it?
Well, there's certain laws, there are certain codes that people follow on earth. But yes, for yourself, you were unusual for us, but we didn't really question.
And you've not asked yourself why?
No.
Isn't it interesting how... It's an interesting question to ask, isn't it?
How it is that you... Well, really the question that I have now is how it is you understand what we understand, and yet you teach about finding that understanding by a completely different route that we have taken. So...
And also, like ones like Aristotle,
yes,
where did they learn it from?
Yes, well, we need to discuss that with these people.
So, like, I understand that John, a man called John, explained it to Aristotle. But where did he learn it from?
So you're saying that everyone learnt it from you?
So where did I learn it from?
No, well, they're telling us now, yes, who you are and...
But the real question becomes, where did I learn it from?
Well, from God, they're saying.
So that means?
Well, it likely means that God created the universe and the laws that exist in the universe.
Yes. Assuming there's only one universe, even there might be many, might there not?
Yes.
But it also means what else?
What do you mean? About you?
No, about God desiring a personal relationship with humanity. See, the very question you raised was you'd not considered that there was a personal God.
No.
And if God is sharing truths with somebody on earth who has a desire to know them,
I see.
Then it would tend to suggest, does it not, that God desires the personal relationship?
Or God is willing to have that personal relationship.
Not just willing, but desirous, given the fact that you have even gotten to your current condition through desire, it would then suggest...
But what is you're saying that God has the desire for us to have the relationship? We understand
no, I'm
that
saying God also has a personal desire to have a relationship with us.
Yes, I understand you're saying that. I just don't understand why. I understand that my progression happens based on my desire, but I don't understand why you're saying God desires a personal relationship with each individual. Why is that logical?
Well, it's not only logical, it's also the fact, based on the fact that the very first person who learnt of these matters learnt them by having a personal relationship with God.
So that indicates that that's a potential to have that relationship. But how does one know that God wants that?
Well, God doesn't do anything God doesn't want.
Yes, and I see now that we're entering the realm of discussing the nature of
the very being you've
of
been
a being,
in denial of
a being
for
that I
many
do
years.
not know, so I
Exactly.
can't really discuss it. Yeah.
But what I'm suggesting is that if God was the kind of being that you suspected God to be, if God existed at all, the kind of being you suspected God to be was a sort of someone who was almost just disinterested in humanity. He just created a whole heap of laws, put them all in place, and just let humanity go on their own way. If that was the real...
My feeling was that creator would be benevolent, but certainly not someone who had a strong desire to interact with each individual.
But why would he even create any individual unless he had a strong desire to interact with them?
I do not know. I haven't considered such matters.
And this is what I'm suggesting is because your growth and progress in the spirit world has been limited to your intellectual development, there's whole areas of investigation that you've closed yourself from engaging, which are essential areas of investigation not only for your own welfare, but also for your future higher happiness, but also for the benefit of the rest of humanity as well. There must be, it makes sense, does it not, that if God does exist, then there must be reasons why God brought humanity into existence.
Yes, that's logical. I just haven't considered it.
Yes, and this is what I'm suggesting is that in the process of considering these emotional issues, besides being quite challenged emotionally at times, you're going to find many of your belief systems, which are quite firmly established over hundreds of years, are going to be quite confronted as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes.
So allow them to be.
Okay.
It's even in this conversation, there's been times where you've felt that I haven't understood where you were going or what you were thinking or where your background was or whatever, and none of that is actually true. I've actually can feel where you're at, and so therefore can fairly quickly assess the kind of conversation we're going to have even based on what I can feel from you. But you are in denial of those feelings, and so it's very hard to have the conversation. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes.
And so there were times in this conversation where you felt you weren't being understood, or I wasn't getting to the point. But I had already established the point that I wanted to get to as soon as you raised your initial questions.
I see.
Because I could feel from you what the issues are. And what I'm suggesting is that these spirits who have come to assist you, they can also feel from you far more than you can feel from yourself at this stage. And so therefore if you can trust their guidance, and you can see they're trustworthy, if you can trust their guidance, you'll be able to grow through this transitional phase in the most rapid way. Does that make sense? Rather than be limited by needing to be logically convinced, which is what we've had to do in this conversation, about everything, you will have the opportunity, if you trust them and are willing to go through a bit of emotional turmoil in that process, that it will benefit you greatly, is what I'm suggesting.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for pointing that out. I feel calmer somehow from you explaining that to me.
And the reason why I wanted to explain it is to help you see that you don't have to be so worried about the future transition, because the worry comes from just feelings that you have inside of yourself that have yet to really have been confronted in your past transition. And it doesn't come from a reality that the future transition is bad or anything. It just comes from the fact that there's been things in your past transitions that have not been addressed or dealt with because of the way or the manner in which you've made these transitions. Certain emotions have not been actually addressed. And what I'm suggesting is that they will talk to you about whole groups of emotions that have not been addressed, and if you can trust them, then you'll progress rapidly through this transition. So if you ask Aristotle how long it took him to make the transition where he could actually enter the...
It was quick, 50 years.
Yeah. But he had to go through an earth space of 50 years. After 600 years in the sixth dimension, there was an earth space of 50 years before he made that final transition. So you can see he must have, given Aristotle as a man who obviously loves learning, you can see that he must have had to learn quite a number of things. But those, if they were just intellectual learning, he could have probably learnt them in a few days. So it makes sense that it has to be some other kind of learning that he had to engage.
Yes, he said that if he wasn't so intellectual, it wouldn't have taken him so long. Well,
Correct.
It's still relatively quick.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have taken him so long if he wasn't so intellectual, because he, like yourselves, has had a certain way of progressing, which he learned and became quite firmly established within him. And as a result, that made it a bit more difficult, not impossible, but a bit more difficult to make this transition.
Right. Yes. Yes, no. He's speaking with us about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting talking to these men and women, they'll help you learn a lot about yourselves, some of which you'll be a bit resistive to, obviously. But the key is to remember that every time you've ever made a transition in the past, you've probably been a bit resistive to the concept in the beginning.
Yes.
And if you can remind yourselves that this is part of the process of growth.
Yes.
Then the transition won't be as difficult. But obviously it's going to be a fairly important transition given the fact that it's a transition from this very intellectual way of considering everything into a more emotional feeling way of considering everything. And also it's going to involve God, which you've been quite opposed to examining.
Yes.
Due to historical harms and hurts from the earth-based existence.
Well, it's clear, yes, we're going to have to investigate this more fully.
And obviously this transition requires God to be involved in some way.
Yes,
because you'll notice that every single one of these people we've brought to you does have a firm belief in a personal God.
Yes, it's very clear.
So there's got to be some thing there, doesn't there?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, thank you.
It's our pleasure, yeah.
Yep. We'd like to return and speak with you in time.
Yeah. Obviously it may take a shorter or longer period of time for some of you than others. It just depends how firmly established your intellect has become and how much you've suppressed emotional processes, and also how much you don't trust emotional processes at this stage. It's going to have an effect on how, you make this transition. But in time, if you're patient with yourselves and, not so resistive to the process, there's a chance of making the transition quite rapidly and then enjoying the new location.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And I pass the thanks from many of us here. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'll say hello to my other friends that are there too.
Yeah. Yes, they're quite a bit more enthusiastic and emotional than ourselves.
Yes, yeah. And I'm sure you will be once you make that transition too. It's going to be an interesting experience when you pass this gate, the one between the 6th and the 7th. And as they will inform you, there are obviously other gates to pass in the future as well. And obviously they'll be quite interesting transitions too.
Yes. Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Our pleasure.